Final ring, here I go.
Welcome to the final ring, where we talk about competitive Apex and kind of try to bring it around to you guys. My name is Zoro, and I am a semi-professional competitive player. I also play casually too. And my co-host is Kwala, and he'll tell you about himself.
Hello, I'm Koala. I've been competing in Apex from day one. I took a little bit of break, came back, and now I'm coaching and analyzing for the most part. So that's a little bit about our experiences. I think we both know a little bit about the game and kind of know what we're talking about when it comes to some of the stuff, and I've experienced some of the stuff from the actual competitor standpoint. So I think we'll have some good insight on some topics. And
Awesome. Yeah, so the reason we're doing this podcast now is that we just finished up Champs, as you guys probably know, and we had some pretty exciting finals games. And so the first thing we wanted to talk about was kind of match point system and what that is and how we kind of feel about it. And so the way match point system works is you play games until one team reaches 50 points, and then if they win a game following that, they win the tournament.
honestly,
So how do you kind of... Yeah,
I was gonna say match point it's really good. It keeps that competitive aspect of the game. It makes it so you have to play super consistent and switch up your play styles once you reach that match point. The only issue that I see teams having with it is obviously the first I would say 3, maybe 4 teams that get to match point are getting focused in the kill feed, and once you reach that 5th team on match point, I think that the 5th team kind of sweeps under the rug and nobody really realizes they're on match point. But overall, I think it's a great entertainment idea for Apex for sure, for BR.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people have issues with it, though, also is another problem. And I think that one of the biggest or most glaring problems that I see with it is that it changes how people play. Like, as soon as you hit match point, you just get aped. If someone sees you in the kill feed, you kind of have to move. You can't really be in the kill feed. And we saw that a lot with TSM because they were the first ones on match point, right?
I mean, even if we take a look over at EU, right? Scars, they got to match point. They completely switched their playstyle and pretty much hid until the absolute 5 squads left where they had to fight and they just had no other option. They didn't shoot at anybody. They pretty much just, sat in the building. They didn't poke. They didn't show presence. They didn't want anybody to know it was them in that building. And that's how they came out of it on top of EU, is they just went under the radar. They didn't show presence at all. And I think that's something that NA needs to pick up on, because I feel like in NA with match point, teams don't change their playstyle enough. I feel like they play the exact same, and obviously if you do that, you don't have that outcome as because of the kill feed snipes and such. So honestly, what I would like to see, I know this is talked about on Twitter a lot, and it's kind of a controversial topic, is anonymous mode for tournaments. Because I think that seeing a team name can really change the playstyles from player to player. Obviously you have, beef or whatever with other players. You're gonna treat that fight a little bit different than somebody who's just, playing the game, rather.
Right, and I think that's a good point, actually. I hadn't really thought about anonymous mode being used in tournaments, and I guess it would definitely help out with the way that you have to change how you're playing. And it would make it so you can play your game consistently throughout the tournament rather than having to do something that you're not used to or don't like doing. Because I'm sure there's teams that kind of get antsy where they're like, we haven't been doing anything for 2 games, and it's kind of tough on the mental to be not performing and not doing anything.
For sure.
You
Yeah.
know? And
I mean,
then
if
you have other teams. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
And then you have other teams like the champions. You have Kungarna NA who won, the NA champs.
Mhm.
They had only won, I think you said earlier, 2 games in the entire tournament. Once in group stages and the final game of the tournament.
Exactly. Yeah. And I
And
mean,
so that I
that's
think is
that's
go
all
for
you
it.
need to win. You know what I mean? It's they did what they needed to do. They got to match point. You know, all the other teams were getting griefed or denied that championship spot, and when they got into the position where they were on match point, they won. And that's something about match point that I think is really exciting to see. Like that underdog comeback story that nobody expects just happens.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it definitely gives you such a good viewer experience where your viewers can really kind of get involved in the story and like have that storyline going through.
For sure. I was gonna say
But
earlier about how like swapping up playstyles. When TSM was on match point, they played different team comps. They backed out and they switched their skins. Like they were trying to do everything they could to be not recognizable. But the issue with that is, no anonymous mode. Their names still show up in chat
as
and
soon
the
as you
whole
get in the
lobby.
kill feed,
Yep.
yeah.
They're like TSM's at this building, and I mean, it's not hard to tell where teams are fighting at. I mean, for anybody who's played competitive, if you see a name in the kill feed, you know what gun they have, you know what that gun sounds like. If it's anywhere near you, you can tell almost exactly
Yeah,
where they are.
it's a lot of information in the kill feed. Definitely, because you can see exactly what's going on around you without actually knowing what's going on around you, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
So yeah, I do think that anonymous mode actually might be a pretty good addition to the competitive scene, or at least the competitive integrity,
I think
just to
kill
keep
feed
things
is
more fair.
I think kill feed is very like underrated for information, and um kind of like a bloodhound scan without having a bloodhound scan, you know what I mean? Cuz
Oh yeah, I mean even in ranked we use it all the time, right? Like
exactly, yeah. I feel like a lot of
you
teams don't utilize it as much as they should, though.
yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely underrated. When you were coaching, did you talk about the kill feed at all?
Not really. For the most part, when I was coaching AM, the main thing that we were trying to focus on was team fights. And I think that's also very, very important to be a tier 1 or a tier 2 team, is to
Yeah.
be able to play off of your teammates, like as second nature without thinking about it. And I think that's something that a lot of teams still have issues with.
Yeah, well, I think even pretty established teams like Complexity can sometimes have issues with that.
Yeah,
Because I mean, we saw them not make finals, and I think that surprised a lot of people. I think part of the reason that they didn't make finals was just that they kind of felt like they were not as together as they usually are, if that makes sense.
yeah, for sure. I mean, Complexity has this really weird playstyle where they control, 3 POIs on the map, and they control a lot of loot, and they play edge zone, and they play really aggressive for kills. But if somebody contests them and throws them off their game, or does something that they're not used to, I feel like they can have a tough time getting over that in some cases, right? I know
Right.
in scrims with AM, I was telling them to loot up, take like 30 seconds and contest Complexity right off the start. You know what I mean? And that really threw them off their game.
Yeah,
And
because AM used to drop Epicenter, right?
yeah, we were dropping in that area. I think we went Refinery for actual group finals and champs.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we ended up. But we had a really, really rough, first 2 days of stages. And then, when it came down to that third lobby, when Complexity was in our lobby, we ended up changing our drop location, planned out some stuff the night before. But, we had a lot of plans to just straight up, contest right away. And I don't think Complexity would have been expecting that. And that's something I feel like that, would have taken them by surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that it would have, because they wouldn't be used to a team, especially a team they don't play against super frequently, contesting them immediately off drop, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that they're getting contested kind of makes them have to change up their playstyle, which is another one of those, getting off your rhythm can definitely make it a little bit harder for you to place well consistently. And I think we also saw that a little bit with NRG. Because it felt like they were getting pushed around a lot in finals. Because they did amazingly in group stages. They had 262 points, which was just about 70 points above the next highest team, which was TSM. They had 110 points in day 2. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And so going into finals, everyone expected them to just like go nuts and dominate the team or dominate the scene, and it just kind of didn't happen, because I think they got pushed around in ways they didn't expect to be pushed around.
Exactly. I think they played all their cards before, they sat down at the final table. They kind of showed everything that they were practicing, and obviously, some zone pulls and that type of stuff could play into a team's favor. But, look at TSM and even G2. G2 is actually very surprising to me, their placement. NRG and G2 were expected to do very, very well, and I think they got, 10th and 11th overall?
Yeah, 10th and 11th. NRG placed 10th and G2 placed 11th. Just below letter E, which was previously quite unknown team, actually.
Yeah.
Davis, Wave, and Masoon Scissors, which is...
3 very good players.
None of those players are... Yeah, exactly. None of those players are bad in any regard. They're very good players.
But they
hadn't put together as a team. Yeah,
exactly. They don't have that, tier 1 organization, spotlight on them, I guess. I was very surprised by them in champs,
I was
actually.
As well. Surprised in a good way.
Yeah, they got to match point fairly quickly. I think they just really struggled after that. Just finishing it off. But
yeah, letter E was on match point in game 8, which, I mean, before that it was only C9 and TSM basically. So
yeah.
They were essentially the third team on match point. But yeah, I think though we see teams like that have like really good successes, and then what happens when they don't place so well in the next major tournament. We kind of saw that with some other teams as well this time around, and after every tournament, teams will split up.
Yeah,
and so we'll see like this just shuffle of players after every major tournament,
which I think is really unhealthy for the scene in general.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
I think if teams don't stick together and like learn how to play together and just swap around player to player every single time they have a little issue with each other, I think it's really hard to build team chemistry and overall become a tier 1 player from that. And something I told the boys, like if you guys stick together and stick through the hard times, you'll have a better chance of being a tier 1 player as a team. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, we saw it with a bunch of teams. Like, I think one of the most surprising ones was ESA White. It's Stomps and Impulsive Dream and Farmer Lucas. I don't think we'd ever seen any indication that they were planning on splitting. Yeah. And then they placed... Like, they placed 15th in finals, but they made it to finals, and they had only been playing together for, 6 months or something?
I'm not too sure, but I know that, those are 3 names that have been, in the scene for a while, and, once again, all 3 very good players.
Yeah, just over 6 months. The team was created in September of 2020, so, I guess 9 months now? Yeah, 9 months.
Yeah.
Not even a year, basically.
Yeah. I think a year is a really good indication of how a team would grow and progress together. You know what I mean? Like being able to stick together for a year and put that time in together and see where you are after that period of time is a really good indication of where you would be in, another 6 months from now.
Right.
But you have these
Yeah,
teams like splitting up after, 2 months together where they're like,
yeah,
they're barely even friends at that point.
right? Like they haven't even had time to get any rapport or dynamic going between the three of them. Like, I mean, maybe they have some, but not a lot. And I think sometimes that's what you see, like 2 players move on to compete together with 1 player not. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe part of it is like their interpersonal dynamics don't work or whatever. Like they have problems outside of the game itself. Yeah. But again, those are things that, in my opinion, you can work through and get better, especially if you have like another one, Lazarus, right? It looks like they're dropping hierarchy. And I think that an organization with that much resources can definitely afford to have a coach that can help them work through that kind of stuff.
That's another thing that we don't see a lot in the Apex scene. And I know there's a few of us, like I know PvP and Hodsick are like 2, coaches that are, really showing up for their teams at this point, where I think a coach helps out a lot more because it gives you that third kind of point of view from
like outside perspective.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And I think having that in a BR is massive. The only issue is this game is so young. I don't think that a coach could be anybody but a fellow pro player. Like, I don't think you could bring somebody in that has coached, let's say, like CSGO or something, right? And have the same impact on a team as somebody who's played Apex competitively, or even a BR in general. I know, shout out X if somehow you're watching this, but when I first started competing with Micah and Spyro, we former yeah, exactly. X, a former PUBG professional player, now analyst, came in and really helped us start off and get that head start that nobody else really had. He sat there and he, broke down some issues that we were having right off the start, and that really, really showed in our like standings and scrims and smaller tournaments and whatnot.
Right.
Like how much it helped very quickly. And I think, that's just one of those things that needs to be done if you are having issues becoming a solid team.
Is getting a coach. Yeah, I think support staff is pretty underrated in general. Like other esports scenes have been growing to the point where they have like a coach and multiple analysts that help the team play their best. And I think something else that is kind of hindering the Apex competitive scene is the lack of, number one, a replay feature within the game, because it's very hard to analyze what went wrong in a game without multiple perspectives. And not everyone streams, right? So you have like your perspective, and then maybe you have a couple of perspectives from across the map.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, in Apex,
so, like, how do you really analyze your own play and their play based on what they may or may not be streaming?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason that, people don't stream could be for a number of reasons, right? Obviously, not streaming will get you better FPS in game. Even if you have like, 2 PCs, Apex is a really tough game to stream and run in general.
It absolutely is.
Especially in scrims, yeah. So, there's FPS issues and input lag that could stop people from streaming. But also, I think it's to, get that actual practice in. And nobody really understands your strats if you don't stream your VOD, right?
Right, exactly.
So I mean... Go ahead.
Continue, sorry. Go for it.
I was going to say, like, having a replay mode where, at least for scrims and private lobbies, right? Where coaches or analysts or managers or something along that line could go in and analyze the VOD from different perspectives and kind of get an
Right.
idea of what went wrong and where it went wrong would be huge for the game.
Oh, I think so too. I think it would just absolutely increase the level of play at all like stages of the game. Like you'd see semi-pro teams performing way better. You'd see professional teams performing way better, just because they're able to properly analyze their gameplay. And
Yeah,
and I'll kind of like on the same token, it's like scrims too. You'd be able to see scrims, and like I get that some teams will be trying to quote unquote, you know, strat save or whatever.
yeah,
But at the same time, you see also these teams not taking scrims seriously at all, or not even showing up, and I think that that also
exactly.
has a huge problem. And I do think that that impacted some of the placements that we were surprised by in finals, in particular NRG. I don't think they really took scrims too seriously from what I saw.
Well, I mean, you saw what they were doing. You know, they were, you know, quote unquote griefing and just throwing themselves at teams, and then the next day they come back and change their names to NRG Denier of Knowledge. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
that's taking scrim serious at all. Which, you know, it could be a strategy to, you know, deny knowledge if you want to call it that. But I think you got to have your, you know, strategies and backup plans and everything figured out so that you don't sit there and, you know, act cocky and then place, you know, 10th or 11th in a massive tournament.
Right, and we have other teams that definitely were practicing. We have like Renegades, Alpine, ESA Black, Letter E. They were definitely preparing for this tournament as well as they could. And so and they were in the top 10. And before this tournament, I don't think you really would have been paying attention to them, but everyone will be paying attention to them now, especially like Alpine and ESA Black
Yeah.
and Letter E, I think. Renegades is a little more well known, and so they're still.
I still think like Renegades' roster is one of the most talented rosters on the like in the game right now, if I'm being honest. You
Oh,
know, the
absolutely.
Pow Pow, Saucer, and Bowser, I think are just three really, really, really solid players, and I think very, very soon we'll see them definitely as like a number one, number two team.
Oh, I completely agree, especially Saucer on his own side. He's very young, and he has just only been impressing, basically. And I think that when he has time to grow and get more experience, he's just going to dominate.
Hundred
And
percent.
having put two players like Bowser and Pow Pow on his team that are already just such dominant players is going to make them definitely top one or two teams. So I think we should definitely keep an eye out on them.
I mean, in
But
6 months, right? I'm seeing, you know, a lot of these underrated teams like, you know, Kangurna, obviously they won last champs. Cloud9, Renegades, like you know, Alpine, Lottery, these teams
even
that
SSG is new.
yeah, even SSG,
Ish.
you know, these teams that 3 months ago nobody would have been talking about like seriously. I think in 3 to 6 months, or by the time the next I think it's in September the next big tournament rolls around, I think they'll
Yeah,
be
ALGS starts again in September. Yep.
insane.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's very healthy for especially the NA scene, but Apex as a whole, is that the amount of teams that are starting to show up and starting to be really dominant and noticeable. And I think that this should be a kind of a signal to teams like NRG, G2, TSM, the ones that have been dominating already, that they kind of need to step up their game. They kind of need to make sure that they're taking this seriously.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, they're not gonna be top anymore.
I think that being said, that, you know, NA specifically needs to, you know, get their ducks in a line here and start scrimming and, you know, preparing for that, because if you don't and you just wipe it off and don't play with your teammates or just play ranked or whatever, you're gonna struggle versus the people who are, you know, taking this serious. And
Yeah.
you know, it
Well,
takes it takes a whole community to, you know, either fail or prosper, right? But
Yeah, we see that in EU, right?
yeah, exactly. It just something needs to happen with like the work ethic of NA, I feel like, for at least scrims.
Well,
I
it's
think that
interesting because that's a problem in esports in general. The League of Legends community has been around for a very long time, and the NA scene still has a problem with how the players and the coaches and the orgs view competitive esports.
yeah.
And I think that's part of a cultural difference between NA and EU and, the Eastern European and even the Asian regions.
Yep. I agree with that. I mean, in other games you have the whole NA as a meme for competitive esports.
Oh, yeah, everywhere.
And I think that really, really shows how inconsistent or, rough it is for, I guess, NA players to compete. Like, obviously, we saw in Valorant, for example, Sentinels absolutely dominated their tournament in their last LAN event, right? And even
Yeah.
in Apex, like, personally, I think NA will still perform very well on LAN, but it won't be like that for much longer. You know what I mean? I think we'll be very
Right.
surprised by a bunch of, EU or Asian teams that have been scrimming and taking this serious for months.
Well, I mean, think about the APAC North teams. Like Rig, I think that Rig would dominate NA.
Yeah.
I just think they would because of how seriously they take the game and how much they play together.
I could see that happening. But
So I don't know. I just think NA has to kind of get their, like you said, get their ducks in a row and start taking competitive seriously if they want to perform consistently well on LAN.
mhm. It's
But
very interesting though. Like, I think one of the main aspects, at least for NA, is how scrims are ran and how we're kind of forced to play in an open scrim environment where tier 1 players are playing against gold 4 players in ranked or like, in scrims. It's
yeah,
like, I think something that EA or Respawn should do right from the get-go is make it that masters or pred requirement to even scrim, right? At least in a tier 1 lobby, or make it qualify for a tier 1 lobby. I mean, back when tier 1 Apex and Apex.pro and Private Apex and all those discords were around, you had to win a, like, was it a week or 2 weeks or a month long Q snipe scrim tournament to get an invite to the private tournament, the private scrims, you know what I mean?
yeah, you had to place well enough consistently throughout the week to move up to, I think we called it Lobby A at the time,
Yeah.
before you were even able to play with the tier 1 teams. And I
Which,
think I think that's part of why some of the teams don't take scrims seriously, is because they're not going to be as the quality of practice that they need, which is a double-edged sword because if they don't participate, the other teams are never going to get better.
yeah. But then again, like, if they do participate, it's almost like wasting your time waiting for everybody else to catch up. Like, there's the big skill gap, I think, in competitive Apex, where if you played in the beginning where, those discords, those Q snipe scrims, the private scrims were a thing, you have a massive advantage on anybody who's tried to get in after those were, after those days have gone, where private lobbies have now come out, and GLL, for example, is running scrims. I think that even sitting 3 months of Q snipe scrims back in the day would have been much more helpful than the entirety of, like, a year long of scrims the way they're ran right now. And
I can agree with that. I think, yeah, I can agree with that. I'll leave it there.
it's just something about, like, not having that skill gap, that separation. That's something that makes other teams work for it and earn it, I think is a big issue.
Yeah, instead of just being like able to play with their idols or whatever.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. I think my only complaint with that is that I think that we just need to set up scrims in the way that there is a T1 scrims and you have to earn your way into it. But at the same time, the mentality that not playing is better than playing. Like I can see it being a waste of time, but at the same time, I don't see anyone like really trying to push through and just organize the T1 scrims and or even T2 scrims. And I don't mean players or teams, I mean groups.
Well, I mean, there is, as far as I know, there is a tier 2 scrim Discord, right? Where it's people who actively want to scrim. I'm not sure, I'm not in it. I'm not sure exactly how they're running it, but I know that there's like an invite tier 2 Discord where they run scrims for anybody who wants to show up and actually take time to learn how to compete, right? And obviously that's not tier 1 and that's not going to be, you know, super high competitive, but it still gets that practice in with people who are, you know, tier 2, you know, they have some experience in the game. It's kind of that, you know, they've hit Masters or Pred, they've maybe played in a few tournaments here and there, but they're not going to be like, you know, people who are winning ALGS or placing even like top 5 ALGS, let's say.
Right. Yeah, there's just a completely different level of skill and competitiveness there. And that I agree with. I completely agree with that. But like, how do you get those teams that are in the T2 area to be T1 teams? You know, where's the pipeline?
You know, that's something that a lot of people, I guess, are asking the same question, right? Like, what's the difference between a tier 2 and a tier 1 team? And honestly, I just think it's experience, right? Because how many tier 2 teams, like if they got to this ALGS champs, right? How many tier 2 teams would be like shaking under pressure and not knowing what to do and just having their brain completely turn off when it comes down to actually competing, you know, for money? And I think that, you know, if you look at the top teams, a lot of these players have competed in other games or have been, you know, doing this long enough to where they've gained that experience to where it's like, whether we win or lose, you know, it's still a game.
We improve. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but at the same time, you have all these ESA teams, right? And like, I know that all of these ESA players are really good players and have experience and stuff, but they're not like TSM. They haven't been a team since like, you know, day one, basically.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a really good proof that the incentive that ESA offers, as well as the consistency, can bring these teams to be a top level competitors.
Which I agree, you know, they have the pro nights where they invite these tier 1 teams onto, you know, 10 tier 1 teams and 10 Series E teams to compete versus each other. And I think that right there is an amazing practice, right? Where even if it's just once a week or once a month or whatever it is, that one scrim right there is doing more for the ESA teams than anything else, right? And
yeah, absolutely. And the tier 1 teams still get some sort of high quality or higher quality practice because they have 10 teams there.
I mean,
I can see
one thing that I've noticed, right, is that everything plays out different, right? No matter if you had the same teams, if you play GLL, for example, it's very like W key, like just ape everything, kills everything, right?
Yeah.
And then if you play Series E, it's more about like a lot of edge teams, and you have a lot of fights, a lot of 3v3 potential. And then when you go into an actual tournament, you see 20 teams left alive in Zone 4. Like, it's just the way these teams are scrimming and practicing really can't prepare you for these final lobbies. And, you know, that's something that needs to change, but I don't think it ever will, honestly.
I don't really think it can. Because of the way that BRs, I think because of the way BRs are played, right? So the way that you have to be, you're incentivized to kill people for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. So in group stages, I think that's why we saw like NRG playing so much better, is because they would push things that they definitely didn't push in finals, right?
Yeah.
Even if it is a favorable outcome for them, there's that fear of having 6 more teams show up, which, I mean, we saw that, right? In game 6, I think, or 7 maybe, up in that tunnel above Survey, when you had
Yes.
CLG, you had SSG, you had Alpine, you had 2 other teams that I can't remember.
I think Liquid was in that mix as well.
Liquid was there, absolutely. And
Like,
Alpine ended up coming out on top, but they only came out on top because they were the last ones to show up.
exactly. Every single team, one team had that position, and I can't remember, maybe it was CLG pushed for it. One person on CLG got knocked, instantly third partied, right? Because that position was the best position in the game.
That was Godspot for sure. Obviously, I mean, Alpine won that game,
Yeah, exactly. But it just happened like that, where one person got knocked on that team, and there was instantly another team there. No time to reset, no time for anything. There was no even way to get out if you wanted to get out. And I think
the closest thing to getting out was the balloon there, and that's just not even an option.
Exactly. Yeah. Anybody going up that balloon, unless you're even a Wraith, I don't think you make it up even half of that, right?
Yeah, not even a Wraith, I don't think. Everyone in the lobby just has such good aim that you're just a
you're a goner, yeah.
At that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I think that something that we've seen though, in situations like that, there was another situation, game 4, perhaps, the launch site ending, where you had letter E was being pinched by G2 and I think Sentinels.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to use Valkyrie to get out, which is actually very interesting because she's a very new legend on the scene, right? And so her abilities are she has those rockets that slow and stun, do a little bit of damage. She can float, which is also kind of not great because you get beamed out of the sky if you're floating around too much. And then she has the redeploy, which is really what makes her kit super strong for competitive. And we saw her used a few times, that one being one. C9 used Valkyrie to reposition to a winning position in a later game as well. And I think that these legends really have potential, at least Valkyrie does. There's other new legends, like I think some of the newest legends we saw were Valkyrie and Revenant. And Revenant we only saw on one team, and that was My Little Phony, and that was just, I'm really not sure what they were doing. It kind of felt like they were just griefing because it didn't feel like they were playing to win. They were playing to kill teams.
Yeah.
Whether or not they died off of it, And that's fine if that's what you want to do. It's just, I don't know, it's tough to justify in a finals lobby at ALGS. But in Valkyrie's case, I think that she really kind of has this 50-50 aspect to her. If you know where everyone is on the map, you can pick a good spot to land. But we also saw her redeploying, and then the redeploy ended up with the team being in a really, really bad spot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of going back to where scrims are important. In these last few days of scrims, we saw a lot of teams really pushing Valkyrie to the edge to see what they could do with her. And I think that's where the whole land on top out of bounds and drop down after 30 seconds came into play, because these teams theory crafted it in scrims, and then when it actually came down to play, everybody knew it was going to happen, and that the teams that ran Valkyrie did that consistently, right? I know there was a few teams that would Valkyrie out on top of a building, and then Caustic and Gibby bubble down onto a team that was holding a position that they wanted. And I think that has potential to be, really, really strong, really, really OP and broken. But, that's something you can really only craft or theorize in a scrim lobby, right?
Yeah, there's no shot you're in a situation where there's 2 buildings. You're talking about the Lava City zone, I believe, where...
Well, there was the Lava City zone, and then there was I think a countdown zone in group stages where a team did that. Where they Yeah. Where they Valkyled up height and then dropped down after 30 seconds, and I think both times they won the fight, whoever dropped down. Yeah.
With Caustic and Gibby. But yeah, and that's something that you can only see in scrims, and if all your practice is W keying, and you're not going to ever get the chance to make these strats that are like honestly game changing. That strat was it altered the
Exactly.
course of the game because no one really expected it and no one was really able to do anything about it. And I mean, obviously now this is one of those things that only works once. As soon as they see a Valkyrie, they're going to start looking for that. But at the same time, it's like,
Exactly.
what
Yeah.
else can you do with her?
And that's something that like won't show up for months almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
It's something that like you won't know. Like there's still new mechanics that haven't been discovered in Apex that nobody knows about that have been in, since the first day. Like,
yeah,
I
mean, like super gliding and
super
tap
gliding,
strafing,
exactly, tap strafing.
They were discovered much later in the scene.
Those were all day one mechanics, but nobody really used them or knew about them until a year and a half later or 2 years later even, and
yeah,
that just shows like without scrims or without the potential theory crafting that these teams do, a lot of these legends won't see their full potential, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's honestly in this finals lobby, the difference between how Revenant was impactful and how Valkyrie is impactful is a really good indicator of hopefully the direction that the Respawn team is heading towards with their character design.
I agree. Yeah. I really hope to see some changes with Valkyrie so that the 30-second out of bounds timer, gets changed for one way or the another. I think that, having that ability to kind of alt out and be completely out of line of sight from anybody and nobody can really counter what you do for 30 seconds, especially in a tournament type of play style, is extremely strong. You know what I mean? And like you were saying earlier, game changing.
Right.
There's other game changing things in Apex, like the KwlaBear, the previous self res, or those things that are really hard to counter. Something that's like RNG at that point, but obviously like Valkyrie is not RNG. It's just it was theory crafted.
No, and I think that's the difference between the KwlaBear and Valkyrie. It's not RNG, and so like we saw C9 win a game off of a KwlaBear shot. They shot results I think out of the air.
Yep.
And knocked him, and that caused Sentinels and C9 to be able to pick on G2 very easily, eliminate them in third place, and then C9 just won the straight up 3v3 against Sentinels. And like without the KwlaBear, that game can go 100 different ways.
Oh, 100%. Like, G2 was in the middle of C9 and Sentinels in that case, and it was very unlikely that they were going to get out or win the game at all. But even having a Gibby up, a Gibby will be able to do a lot of damage to a single team, like, before he gets knocked, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
The fact that he got knocked for free and then, there was just 2 players up is a big difference between, Cloud9 winning that game or Sentinels winning that game at that point.
Right, exactly, yeah. And I mean, this isn't even the only instance of seeing items or characters completely change the outcome of a game. I mean, we saw in game, what was it, 2 or 3? Let's see. Game 5? No.
There were a few games during this tournament.
Game 3. Game 3 was when Snipe. Yeah, but I want to talk about when Snipe Down got res.
Yep.
Because that mobile res was insane. It was just, it absolutely changed the game. Obviously, they won the game off that. They mobile resed him. He walked into the zone.
Punched 2 people. Yep. Knocked one into zone. Knocked him.
One into zone.
And then Reps was able to clutch up the 1v1. Yep. That was, in my opinion, one of the best Apex plays to history. Like it's gonna go down.
That doesn't go down
forever.
Yeah, if that doesn't go to the top Apex history, something's going wrong.
But that's something that like a lot of people would look over. You know what I mean? You see a mobile respawn beacon, you're like, I don't need that. It's okay. But like,
Yeah,
these small things that completely change an outcome of a game is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. I know that like I was saying earlier with self-res, right? That was something that really changed it too often. You know what I mean? Like a mobile respawn,
yeah.
you're not going to get very many, examples of somebody calling it a mobile respawn, respawning a teammate and winning a game because of that. But the amount of times that a self-res was found from either just an RNG loot pool or a vault or whatnot, that, somebody got a self-res off and won the game or griefed the team, or, even teams having 3 self-reses and being able to block each other while they res.
That was actually terrible. I remember watching some of that, and that was just the worst. But yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. I think that the difference is the RNG versus not RNG. Right?
Yeah.
Like the mobile respawn is a positive influence on the game because it's not RNG based. They had to actively make that call, and everyone knew what was happening.
Yeah.
Everyone knew. You see that come down, you see the ship come in. Like there's no, I hit a headshot, it's now a 2v3 push.
Exactly. And I mean, most of the times that isn't an RNG item. You can craft that in the crafter, right? Every single person in the game has access to it, where, it's the same thing with like the batteries and the crafter in general, where that is a system to limit the RNG factors of a battle royale, which I think it is, one of the best things Apex has done for at least competitive, where, if you are leaving your drop spot with very, very bad loot, no heals, whatever, you can sit there, take 20 seconds, craft 4 bats, a few med kits, and you'll be all right. And, if you want a mobile respawn beacon or attachments for your gun or whatever, but that's something that would, limit those RNG factors to play more consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone has access to it, like you said, whereas the Kraber is like, you have, I think, a 1 in 5, well, not, okay, it's less than that, but like, maybe you get to one of the 5 care packages. Right,
Exactly.
And maybe it has a Kraber in it, and if it does, chances are you're going to win the game off of that, unless you make a really stupid push.
Exactly, yeah. Well, if not win the game, you're at least at the pro level, you're almost guaranteed, knocks and kills from it, right? How you use those knocks and those kills can impact the game, right? If you're poking with the Kraber, you're doing something wrong. If you are, shooting at someone to get a knock and then you're going to reposition off of that, like push that team, get them out of that spot, that's how you use the Kraber. And I think that's something that you don't see a lot of ranked players do, you know what I mean? And obviously, ranked and competitive is completely different, but if you're just sitting there shooting a Kraber at somebody, you're using it wrong. If you're not planning to make a play off of it, it could be used in a better, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too, and I think that that's one of the big reasons that it really shouldn't be in competitive.
I mean, in all honesty, I think competitive and casual play should have different rule sets and different, I guess, mode types, if that makes sense, right? Like, obviously, when it comes down to competitive endgame, right, you have the slow circle closing in. How many times have you played a pub or even a ranked game and been to that slow circle
into the end zone, the zone 6 closing on you, it's
like that just doesn't happen. So when these competitive players are complaining about something in the game that's completely broken or busted that shouldn't be a thing, like, I want to say 9 times out of 10 they don't care that it's in pubs or even in ranked. The issue they have is when it's in competitive. And I think that if Respawn splits up like the I guess modes where
like having a competitive build and a public build.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can see that. And there's a couple other things that kind of go along with that. And there are weapons that, like, I don't know. Obviously, this will be a contentious topic, but it's something I want to talk about is like the Spitfire, right? The Spitfire and the Devotion. How many teams did we see running a Spitfire in finals, let alone groups?
I would say a majority, honestly.
Almost every. And if a gun is getting used by a majority of the teams, same way that a Legend is getting used by a majority of the teams, maybe it needs to get looked at. Maybe it needs to get tweaked for competitive. And they don't have to tweak it for public play. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
There's no, and like maybe it is broken in competitive play, maybe it isn't. It's not the point. The point is that there should be, and I agree with you. I definitely think you hit the nail on the head there too. Is that there should be two separate builds, one for competitive and one for public play.
Yeah, and I mean, if we want to talk about balancing, it's like, you have these guns and these percentages and everything that they make their balancing off of, but I think those balances are flawed, right? I think the way that Respawn balances their weapons are flawed because, how fun is it to go around with an R99 or a wingman and just one mag someone, or even, just have that satisfaction of double headshotting someone with a wingman,
The double
right?
headshot, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, those are very skillful things to do because you can't miss when you do that. But at the same time, those guns are getting nerfed over something that has 65 bullets that does 1,000 damage. Like if you full spray, like, it's
well, it's like when they nerf or buff Legends based on pick and win rate. It's like,
exactly.
Wraith is a pretty good example because it does not matter what you do to Wraith. Her portal is so strong that teams at the high level will pick her no matter what. And when casual players or public players see these competitive and high caliber teams picking Wraith on, they're going to pick her too.
Exactly.
That's just the way it's going to happen because they see that she's performing well and they also would like to perform well. And so they change what they do based on what they see. And it's not a very good way to go about balancing. They really have to look at how the character or gun impacts gameplay itself rather than looking purely at a sheet of paper that says, oh, Wraith was picked 99.999% of the time. Obviously, that's an exaggeration, but
yeah,
you get the point.
Well, I mean, how many times would you say a casual player watches their favorite streamer or pro player that's like, oh my god, how's the best Wraith player to ever exist, right? And then I want to be like him, and then goes into a public match and picks Wraith. They're not going to perform anywhere near the same, right? Their experience levels and, overall just skill is nowhere near the same. But how many of those players do you think are playing a Legend only because they see somebody else play it, right? Only because you have the Asus or the Lyrics or the Fades or, the Howls where it's like, this character is good in their hands. But outside of that, not really.
Yeah, and I mean, you see that with a lot of people. Like Timmy plays a lot of Pathfinder. He used to.
Yeah.
Even when Pathfinder had been nerfed to the ground, he would still play him because he was a lot of fun, and B, when you have that kind of mechanical skill, having that much mobility is just an absolute benefit.
Yeah.
And so it's like that also undoubtedly impacted his however many 12 to 14,000 viewers.
Exactly. Well,
And
I mean,
that's
even Caution, right? Mm-hmm. Caution has completely blown up simply because of his Pathfinder movement and his Pathfinder skill in general. Like, I'm sitting on TikTok or Twitter or something, right? And I see a Caution clip and I'm like, dude, I want to play Pathfinder now. Like, I want to do that. And it's like, I mean, even from a level like this is like, that's cool. I want to be able to do that.
Oh yeah. And one of those things, you always see like a Pathfinder doing crazy shit or crazy stuff in pubs, and you're like, oh, I hope that's not Caution. I hope I don't make it into a Twitter or TikTok clip.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's and of course we're not casual players at the game, right? We play the game with a specific purpose other than just to kind of have fun or to play a game or even to get better at the game. Like we play it at a competitive level or we analyze at a competitive level. And even us, we see those things, we want to play it. So I think that effect is only going to be multiplied as someone who plays the game to have fun. And obviously there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just a majority of the players do just want to have fun. I mean, it's a game at the end of the day, so.
And I think Caution's not the only example of that either, right? Like going back to what I was saying earlier, like Asu, like Dizzy, you know what I mean? Like Fade.
Yeah.
You see Fade on a zip line, you're just like, oh my gosh, what the heck? And you know how many players in pubs now on World's Edge that land at that streamer building and just sit there and zipline jump for hours and hours and hours on all day with the final sunset on, right? It's like
Right.
there's at least like 3 every single game. And
Oh, yeah.
it's just because they want to be like that person and they want to be able to do that. And it's something that I don't think devs exactly think about when they go into like balancing, right? And I think that's a flawed system.
I think so too. And don't get me wrong, I love the Apex devs. I think they do some really good work, but I also
100%.
think that they have some places that they can really improve on, and I think this is one of them. I think their balancing team really needs to take an introspective eye and look at how they balance their legends. And then, like you said, I think they really do need to consider having balancing be different for competitive versus public play, because it's really hard to overstate how different competitive play is versus even ranked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a completely different game. It just is.
And there's nothing that's gonna change that either, right? Like for the first season of ranked, right, where obviously Sentinels was the first team to Predator, and every single game was a scrim. You know what I mean? Every single game from Bronze 4 to Pred, that like week and a half or however long it took, was a scrim lobby, right? And
oh yeah.
we will never have that again because the way ranked plays out right now and the way like it's set up, it's not meant for that. And
yeah, I mean, we could potentially have something close, at least, if we change the rank system to team-based kills rather than individual. But at the same time, I know how much of a problem that can be with the cheater situation.
Even team-based kills, like that would really promote the boosting and this, that, the other, the cheater situation. Yeah. And I think that's something that, you know, needs to be addressed sooner rather than later as well. Like, you go into a Pred lobby.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, exactly. You go to a Pred lobby, though, and how many games in a row are you either getting DOSed or running into cheaters or this, that, and the other? And it's just like, that's something that I don't think should be an issue, but is, right?
Yeah. I mean, I took it upon myself to every time I got DDoS, I would ping Respawn on Twitter, you know, because it was getting so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I think some days I would at Respawn like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times a day, and I wasn't even playing for that long.
Exactly. And you know,
yeah, it's crazy.
I think that you know, having that issue in a game like this is really, really a mood killer. Like, obviously, you can ask anybody in the Apex scene, right? They'll complain about Apex. They'll say it's, you know, it's this, that, the other. But at the end of the day, it's still one of the best BRs out there, right? The devs did an amazing job.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we'll sit here and we'll complain all day, but it really truly is one of the best games out right now. And
yeah, I've gone and played other shooters, and there's nothing compares. The movement is just so smooth. The gunplay is so good, and it's just like the base mechanics and mechanical aspects of the game is just far and away a different tier than other games.
Exactly. And I think that anybody that's like played the game and has taken the time to like learn the game would agree with that for the most part.
Yeah, I think so too. And like, I mean, how many pros have we seen leave and then come back because they just playing another game just doesn't feel the same? And
yeah.
Like, even streamers, like I know Asu's done because I would be too if I grinded the game that hard.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that's a different, you know, a different comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have a lot of people leaving and coming back because it feels so good to play the game. Like it's hard to compare it to other games. But yeah, so I think we've kind of hit everything that we wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we'll talk. So this again has been Final Ring. We're planning. I'll tell you guys a little bit about what our plans are for the future, and Koala can jump in a little bit if I get something wrong or whatever. But we're planning on doing this bi-weekly. So every other week we'll have a podcast released on Mondays. We'll try to be getting some guest speakers at least once a month. So every other episode will have a special speaker, and hopefully they'll be around this amount of time every time. But we are going to be trying to get this out, like I said, every other week on Mondays. And so, yeah, hit us up on any of our socials. I think we're probably going to have those displayed on screen at some point. And so if you have things you want to talk about, comments about the episode, things that you think we got wrong or would like to discuss, absolutely let us know.
Obviously, this is like an open conversation type of deal. So feel free to chime in either in the comment section or, add us on Twitter or whatever feels right. And if you have any suggestions for future podcasts or anything that you want us to talk about specifically, you can, tweet those questions at us or at AM or Absolute Monarchy, I believe is the ad on Twitter. And I'm sure we will get around to it if there's some good questions on there.
Yeah, we would love to hear from you. So yeah, thanks for listening to the first podcast.
Final ring, here I go.